So one day I was out playing baseball on a abandoned lot, empty lot near my house, and my wife was there. We were only about 8 or 9, 10, something like that. I was there with some of my friends. One of them was a tough little guy. I was little too, but not as tough. And we were having an argument about something, and we were going to have a fight. And my mother walked by. And my mother is a pretty nice person, you know, and she had to learn late in life, to some degree, to stand up for herself when she went back into the workplace and had to confront some relatively intimidating and pushy men. And it was hard on her to do that, but she was no pushover, my mother, and she's a good person. And she walked by just as this fight was about to emerge. And I was not particularly confident of the probability of my uninjured victory in this fight. But I was a hell of a lot more afraid that my mother was going to come over and interfere. And she didn't. But she knew what was happening. She looked, I saw her look, I knew she knew I knew, and she walked on. And it's like, more power to her, you know. And because I was fortunate to have a mother like that, let's say, I got into enough of the sorts of scrapes that teach you how to avoid a certain amount of scrapes, and that worked out quite nicely. And that's meant my mother was willing to invite malevolence, invite the evil queen into my life, at least to some degree, you know, because she knew better than to assume that that could be just dispensed with. This program this guy that was having these fantasies, he said he's very afraid of the fantasies because they were murderous. And you think, murderous fantasies, when do they emerge? Well, they definitely emerge when you've been pushed 100 times and now you're past anything that vaguely resembles reason. And then the fantasy comes up as a manifestation of rage. So I asked him to write down what had happened and also to write down the fantasies. You know, what reaction is it that you're having? Now, you'd hope that it wasn't like he leapt from happy to murderous in one leap. He went through mildly irritated, extremely humiliated, continually humiliated, repeatedly continually humiliated, and then, well, even a few years later, into murderous rage. And the problem with that is that he should have intervened a lot earlier. And so part of what he needed to learn by going back into that memory, which was now associated with those murderous fantasies, is that the aggression that was manifesting itself in the fantasies hadn't been manifested early enough in the process that led to his humiliation. And so then you can imagine, well, why didn't he react to being bullied in a way that would have stopped it? And the answer to that might be, well, he didn't have the skill, he didn't have the physical prowess, or perhaps he was overprotected. I don't know, because I didn't know the story. But it doesn't make any difference, because what he needed to figure out was how to take that response and differentiate it into something that was reasonably skilled, so that the next time someone pulled a stunt that was like the stunts that led to his humiliation in high school, he was ready to act. And so you can think, if a memory that you have that's old, well, or a problem that's bothering you right now that won't let you go, you can look at your fantasies, because they'll often give you a clue as to what the appropriate response needs to be, not that that's necessarily the response you have to manifest. And then the trick is to implement the response in a manner that stops you from falling into the same hole that you fell in many times before. These stories that the psychologist's students wrote about their past traumas were curative, because if they used words that indicated understanding, comprehension, etc., then they were remapping the territory that they hadn't mapped properly the first time they walked over it. And all of you is very much concerned with your stability and your safety from betrayal and malevolence, and the probability, the probability that the necessity to avoid unnecessary tragedy. And so any past behavior that indicates that there's a hole in the map that you're using to orient yourself in the world lets all that terror shine through, and that's what the alarm is. And the reason it goes off is because it's saying to you, you have a map, it's got some bad holes, and the holes are places you probably are going to have to go again. And so if you go there again and the hole's still there, you're going to fall in the hole. And the last time you fell in the hole, it wasn't good for you, and so you should be alert to that. And so that's the reason that memories of that sort won't go away. It's actually a good thing, although it can be very bad if you don't know what to do about it. And it isn't merely a matter of expressing the emotion that's associated with the past catastrophe, because often that not only does that not help, it can actually make it worse, because the mere expression of your frustration, let's say if you were bullied in high school, doesn't stop you perhaps from still being the sort of person that might be bullied by your coworkers. And that's not a positive outcome by any stretch of the imagination. So this program we wrote, it's sort of like psychotherapy for free, essentially. It asks you to, and I used it on this client of mine who'd been bullied into a psychotic state when she was in high school. She could hardly even talk when she first came to see me, and she was hallucinating in all sorts of strange ways. She was really badly fractured by this person who'd tortured her 3/4 to death, and we went through her whole life. She could talk a little bit, and she could write a little bit, and I sat her behind my desk at my computer, and we opened this program. And what it does is it has you divide your life up into epochs, whatever you want. Maybe it's kindergarten, grade 1 to grade 3, grade 3 to grade 6. You know, you can do it numerically like that. You could do it by age. I had people who were more agreeable in temperament. They would divide their life up into relationships. That was really how they conceptualized the stages of their lives. Each relationship, you know, it depends on you. It doesn't really matter, however you conceptualize your life. And then the exercise has you walk through and describe significant events, positive and negative, to lay them out and then to analyze them. It's like, well, what did you do right that enabled the positive events to occur? And what did you do that you might be able to alter, or that you learned to alter later, or that you could alter now, that would help you avoid the negative events? So it's not merely the recounting of the negative, it's, in some sense, it's the extraction of the moral of the story. You know, there's this old idea, I'm sure you've heard me talk about it before, that dragons guard gold. It's a very strange idea, very old idea, treasure of one sort or another, that they threaten the city eternally. That's a dragon. And the city, in some sense, is the citadel of your memory, and the chaos that's outside of the citadel of your memory can always emerge to threaten the citadel, and that's the same story as the Garden of Eden and the snake. It's exactly the same idea. And if you confront the thing that threatens, then you can find the treasure. And you can use that to rebuild the citadel, but also to turn yourself into something that can confront the dragon. And that's the real treasure, right? Is to turn yourself into something that can and is willing to confront the dragon. And so, you know, I did a lot of work with people in my clinical practice on assertiveness therapy and assertiveness training, and these are often for people who are very agreeable, and they're more likely to be bullied. And the reason for that is that they don't like conflict, but there's another reason too, which is that they don't have enough faith in the truth and enough fear of the consequences of not telling the truth. And so they'll pretend that things are all right when they're not all right, and then forestall catastrophe for later. And so let's say your boss is kind of a bullying type and pokes at you a bit, takes advantage of you a little bit, and you think, well, that's not really worth making a fuss about, but you go home and you're kind of resentful, but you don't pay any attention to that. Maybe you think you shouldn't be resentful, but probably you don't think that. You just don't want to confront your boss. And the thing is, though, if you do it if it's on the first foray, and you say, here's the reason I won't do that, well, maybe you'll get fired, but probably not. Not if you're careful. Generally, someone like that will think, oh, you're not as easy to pick on as I thought you were, and they'll go find someone else, or maybe they'll even learn something from the encounter. And that takes a fair bit of courage, and that's part of that confrontation that we just described, is that you're resentful because you've been taken advantage of and you have something to say, and so you need to say it. And when I was doing assertiveness training with my clients, I often talked to them about their resentment. That would be the kind of resentment that might have someone generate murderous fantasies 4 years later. These people who go out and do murderous things, they've harbored an awful lot of resentment. There's a lot of things they didn't say when they should have said them, that's for sure. And so, and if you let the people around you who you love hypothetically take advantage of you, then you're going to harbor resentment, and that's going to come out in all sorts of ways that are really not positive in the least for you or for them. And so it's better just to it's just better to draw the line when when all there is of the dragon is one tooth. Say, no, here's why, leave me alone, or here's how I want to be treated instead. And insist upon that, right? You draw a line. And it's not like that's nothing. And then I suggested to this man with murderous fantasies that he think about what he could have done different in high school. In principle, maybe he needed to get stronger, so he was more confident. I'm not saying this is easy. That's irrelevant. Lots of things aren't easy that end in catastrophe, and the problem was that he was humiliated and now he's murderous, and that's not a good outcome. So even if it's difficult, that doesn't mean it's unwarranted. But even more particularly in a situation like that, you ask, well, how did you allow it to come to such a pass? And what could have you done differently? And maybe you might find that there wasn't anything that you could do differently back when you were in high school, but by the time you're in university, you're not in high school anymore, and the world's shifted quite a bit. And generally, you're around more sophisticated people, and that kind of bullying is less likely. And so you still might have some aggression to integrate within you so that you're not a pushover. And if you do that, well, then those memories, in all likelihood, are going to stop. As long as you're confident that now you know what to do, those memories are very likely to stop plaguing you, and then hopefully those